Evening, good afternoon. I'm excited to have this presentation today for you about a particular book that Tere Arcq edited called 5 Keys to the Secret World of Remedios Varo. But Tere Arcq is a foremost authority in the work of Remedios Varo, and I'm just really delighted that she accepted our invitation to do this presentation. She has perhaps been involved in every shows I know of Remedios Varo, or when Remedios Varo is involved in that show, whether she curated it, co-curated, or consulted in the past 15 years. She lives in Mexico City, and she has worked as a chief curator at the Museo de Arte Moderno in Mexico City. She co-curated many exhibitions. You can look at the list of her achievements in our bios, in her bio. One of the major exhibitions she co-curated was in Wonderland, and it was a big success at the Los Angeles County Museum. It was the Adventures of Women Surrealists in Mexico. She has she is doing an upcoming exhibition, and you have to not miss that one, at the Chicago Art Institute, and she's co-curating it with Caitlin Haskell. And that's happening this coming summer, summer 2023. I came to meet Tere in 2007 when she came here to do her research about her book and wanted to see the relationship between Gordon and Remedios Varo, because they were very close friends. And that's how we met, and we started dialoguing. We had many dinners and conversations. And then she invited me to write a chapter on Remedios Varo and her dreams. And that's how I started to get to know Remedios in a much deeper way through this project I did with Tere. I was introduced to Remedios Varo by Gordon Onslow Ford in 1989 with the wonderful biography of hers that Janet Kaplan wrote. And I highly recommend that. It's called Unexpected Journey. For those of you who want to know more about her, that biography was just unbelievably good and very well written. So I highly recommend that. Now, we had this presentation, this lecture. We had scheduled it twice, and we had to cancel it because she got sick. And also she could not meet today again. And what happened is that she didn't want to cancel it. She wanted to see if we could pre-record her presentation, and I accepted. I thought if we could do that, she didn't want to cancel again. And we didn't want you to wait again. So we pre-recorded. So then after her presentation, I'll come back. She wanted it to be more of a conversation. But I basically asked her one question and let her just go with the question. So this presentation is in 2 sections. The first section is her process of creation of this book. And this is the book. I don't know if any of you have seen this book. This is a gorgeous book, but the problem was that as soon as it came out, it went out of print. But she is working with another publisher to print it again. And I think that we have one of the chapters in our Lucid Art Foundation. You can look at that chapter and read it. So she's going to talk about the process first of the creation of this book. And then the second part, she's going to focus on Remedios Varo and her interest in esoteric knowledge. And then we will come back together, and for question and answer, we'll have this dialogue. So I'm just going to turn my video off, so then you can listen to the presentation. Our invitation for this wonderful session about Remedios Varo. We all have been looking forward to hearing your wisdom and all these years of research on this wonderful painter that we all love. And as you wish, we will do this conversation around Remedios Varo. And I was just curious how the idea of this book came about from the beginning. Like, how did you come up with this idea? And I have to say that to our audience, that this book came out and right away was out of print. But I've heard that you're going to print it again. So the audience know that you're going to be printed. So how did the idea came about, Tere?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. And from the distance, hello to everyone. I'm very happy to be sharing this with you. So this has a long history. And well, here's Remedios Varo. When I was doing my studies in art history, which was actually an older age, that was my second career, my lifetime passion, but my second career. And I was always wondering about, where are the women in all the art history books and periods? And I was lucky enough to live in Mexico City, where we have MAM, the Modern Art Museum, that has the largest collection of women artists in the country, and very strong focus on the surrealist. And the museum have also received first in long-term loan and then in donation, a wonderful collection of Remedios Varo's works. So at the beginning, I was doing my dissertation on the whole collection of women artists at MAM, but then I really fell in love with Remedios Varo's work. Of course, all the surrealists in Mexico were of my interest. Here we have a photo of, we see Remedios and Leonora Carrington, Benjamin Pérez, is the whole group that gathered together in Mexico. She arrived in 1941 as an exile, she's originally from Spain, but she was in France and trying to flee the Second World War, and she came following Benjamin Pérez, the French surrealist poet, her partner. So I was fascinated by her work and decided to change the subject of my dissertation to Remedios Varo for one reason. Well, I started working as a curator at MAM, and the very first assignment I had was to focus completely my time on the study of the provenance of this donation, because it was under a legal battle. So I had to research and read absolutely everything that was available on Remedios Varo to document the history of every single painting. I will not go into details of the legal battle because it's like a whole documentary, but basically it was diving into her life, and I was spending at least 3 days a week with Walter Gruen, who was her partner for the last 12 years of her life, and his second wife, his wife after Remedios died, and Alexandra Varsoviano. And I was more and more attracted to her work. And also, and that's why I'm showing this picture here, when I was walking around the museum, looking at the collection and how things were going, I always noticed that visitors spend much more time in front of Remedios Varo's paintings than anything else. Not even Frida Kahlo could, beat her on that. And they were always asking questions about, what is the mystery here? What could this mean? What is behind this painting? And as I was, reading catalogs and interviews and everything, I could find this quote that was repeated over and over again on how her work was really influenced by Gurdjieff and Uspensky. And it was quoted from Walter Gruen and also from Juliana Gonzalez, who was her friend and a philosopher. But nobody really explained how, or, you know, how did any of these two mystics, philosophers influence her work? So I started by, I was really curious. So I started reading them. That was my first task. And not only reading them, I realized there were groups working in Mexico City and people giving seminars about the so-called the fourth way that Gurdjieff proposed in terms of a system for the evolution of consciousness. So I also started attending all these seminars to try to understand the context and how it happened in Mexico. Here we have them, George Gurdjieff, and Peter Uspensky. And they were really important for many artists as I started, you know, doing my research. And Uspensky in a different way at some points, because even though they were curious about the same ideas, they were investigating all this ancient knowledge that was still maybe alive in some cultures like Egypt and India and Israel, everywhere around the world. They were researching all this ancient knowledge, as was also Madame Blavatsky doing for the Theosophy. And they actually met in Russia when they were both investigating. They realized they had a common interest. And they were not only looking for theory, they were looking also for ancient practices that were influential on the transformation of consciousness. And one of them, for instance, was the Sufis and the Dervish dances, you know, from the Islamic cultures that Gurdjieff was so interested in. So they sort of became not exactly partners, but they started working together and supporting their ideas. But Uspensky on his side was also doing very serious research around the fourth dimension. And that was very influential for many artists before the war, as Fariba knows very well, because Gordon was really, Gordon Onslow Ford was really into that. So as I was doing research about them and reading books, and I also knew for reading Janet Kaplan's biography of Remedios Varo and talking to Janet, I knew her well. And she told me, you know, I could never get any information because nobody wanted to talk about Remedios' involvement with them. It was like a secret society. So I was even, you know, more intrigued. And as I was doing research, I was at Mom's library, and somehow I found this little catalog from the Lucid Art Foundation on Gordon. And I found this photo where we see Remedios Varo with Gordon and Jacqueline Johnson and the Peruvian poet Cesar Moro in Rongarícuaro. So the first thing I did was to contact Fariba. And of course, I was reading in that book that Gordon was also interested in Uspensky. So that really, you know, got me so much more interested in researching the subject. And that's how I met Fariba for the first time. We exchanged emails, and I was invited for my first residency at the Lucid Art Foundation to talk about Remedios, right, Fariba?
Yes, and you gave a beautiful lecture about Remedios while you were doing your research. And that was the first time, I think, that you came here for the residency. Yeah, I'm just curious, you know, for some of the audience who are not unfamiliar with the fourth way or fourth dimension, could you say a little bit about that and how Remedios was interested in that and how it affected her paintings?
Yes, actually, I have an example here that I wanted to show because, well, Uspensky was also very influential for Cubism. And because his idea of, actually, he thought the only ones that could be able to really understand the fourth dimension were artists. They could find a way to represent a fourth dimension in a bidimensional surface, like a canvas. And they were experimenting with that. And this is an early Varo from 1943, around the time she was very close to Gordon. Gordon acquired the mill, El Molino in Erongarícuaro in 1942. And they started remodeling. And part of he was using, not using, but asking the help of some of the artists that had no money and needed to have an income, such as Cesar Moro and Esteban Frances, who was very close to Varo at the time, to help supervise the works of the house and to make it a studio and a home next to the lake in Michoacán. That's where Erongarícuaro is situated. And it was visited by everyone. Varo, Carrington, Wolfgang Palen, Mata, when he traveled to Mexico, went there, Jacqueline Lamba, Kurt Seligman, everybody. And so this is at the time what Remedios was doing, trying to create this idea of how can we see an object from every side within, a flat surface. So basically that was how she was trying to work on the fourth dimension on painting. Fariba, probably you want to add more about how it was fascinating when you told me that Gordon had discussed with you many times his conversations with Remedios Varo about these topics and how close they were.
Yes, it's very interesting because at the time, 1942, 1943, Gordon did a whole series of paintings where he often talks about that he wanted to make a painting that everything is visible, nothing is hiding behind other forms. So one of them is that he did is called the Luminous Land was one of them, that he was just trying to create a landscape that everything is luminous and everything is visible. So, and then he started to use pointillism almost to break that whole form, the solid form, and go into more the invisible realm that he talked about later on. And it's very fascinating because he told me that Remedios and Gordon, they had such a strong affinity and they had incredible conversations, and it was around Ouspensky's interest, their interest around Ouspensky. But Gordon was saying that Remedios wasn't showing him too many of her works at the time. I mean, as we know, and you can say later about when her mature works started to come about. I mean, she was not showing so much of her work, but she was in conversation with him, and they were very much stimulating each other. In fact, often he told me that his wife, who was getting her PhD in literature, Jacqueline Johnson, she was more of the, she was interested in more Western philosophy. Gordon was more interested in Ouspensky and Asian philosophy. So his connection philosophically was much more closer to Remedios, and Jacqueline's philosophically was very close to Paulin, and that's that the dialogues were going on.
Yes, actually, what you're saying, it's very interesting that he didn't see many works, and because she was not really painting at the time, and I was not sure about the reason why. I mean, I know, and everybody knows from the biography and Catalogue Raisonné that she was doing a lot of commercial work, trying to survive, but also in recent letters that were recently published between Benjamin Perret, her partner, and André Breton, it turns out that a lot of the time spent in Mexico at the beginning, Remedios was ill, was constantly sick. And also she was the one responsible for the whole household. She was the one providing, the money to eat while everybody else was struggling. Tere couldn't get a penny for his writing. It was really a complicated time. And it's also interesting that Leonora Carrington mentioned in an interview, because she met briefly Remedios in Paris in one of the surrealist cafes, and then they found each other again in Mexico in around late 1942, around 43. And she said that when she saw again Remedios in Mexico, she was painting in a Cubist style. So she was referring to this kind of paintings, which Remedios was more thinking about Uspensky in that sense. And it was a big gap of time between, this work and when she developed her signature technique, like we see here. And in a way, she's also taking from Uspensky and the idea of the fourth dimension on how she creates the vehicle that we can see as we see the inside and the outside at the same time, and up and down, and the profundity, like what you said, that Gordon wanted that everything could be seen in the painting. So in a way, she was doing sort of the same kind of thing. But we'll talk more about this evolution in a minute. And so I started reading all these books. The only one at the time from some of the ones you see here that I have seen in Varo's library was Le Monde Analogue by René Dumal, who was a follower of Gurdjieff. And Remedios has a painting with the same title, Ascending the Mount Analog. So for me, that was like a first clue. And at the time in her library, I could not see, at least the way they were organized in what Walter Gruen considered was Remedios' library, and then other sections of the house, there was nothing really on Gurdjieff or Uspensky there for me to look at. But as I started reading and marking books and things, I had this very strong feeling that many of the paintings were based actually on some of the ideas of Gurdjieff and Uspensky, but at the moment I could not prove it, and sometimes Walter thought I was maybe exaggerating how important they were, and they were not so much. But then something changed things. Oh, I should go back to another slide. Oh, there we go. And then we go to the beginning of the book. I found this article by Lois Parkinson talking about some of the groups in Mexico, and she mentions Christopher Fremantle. And he was a follower of Gurdjieff, British painter, comes to Mexico, and he starts organizing meetings and groups. So I start Googling him, and I find a book about his ideas, which it's called On Attention, and had an introduction on by a woman with her last name Fremantle, Firestone, Lillian Firestone, who turned out to be his secretary when he came to Mexico. She was very young. And I started researching on when they arrived. So it was two followers, mainly Rodney Collins Smith and Christopher Fremantle. So digging and digging, someday by chance, I start talking to the Gruens about Christopher Fremantle. And I asked them if they ever knew about him or met him. He was in Mexico in the 50s, about the same time that Walter and Remedios got together. And he said, of course. And his son is in touch with us. He sends us a Christmas card every year. And I asked, well, where does he live? He lived in New York City, and I was leaving for New York City on a research trip for something else on the following day. So there was no number, but I found only two Fremantles in the phone book, and they confirmed his name, and I just called and left a message. And he called me back, and I ended up having breakfast in his house. And he was very curious, asked me so many questions about why I was so interested and why I was reading and what connections I could find, with Remedios and the groups. He wouldn't say much. He was just asking questions. It was like a long interview. And after about 2 hours, he gets out a phone book and starts calling people and making appointments for me. And the very first one was this woman, Lillian Firestone, who was here. And she told me all this story about the workshops that he was organizing. And he immediately recognized Remedios' picture, confirming that she was going to these workshops where they were trying to apply Gurdjieff's ideas of the evolution of consciousness using art as a medium. That's something that Gurdjieff never did. He will use knitting and embroidering and other physical activities, but not really painting. So this is something that was quite original by Fremantle. And he became really close to Leonora and Remedios, of course, because he was British, the same as Rodney Collins Smith. So thanks to Christopher's son, somehow miraculous things were happening. I started getting phone calls from people. We want to help you. We can interview you. I ended up meeting people that were part of the groups at the same time as Remedios. And they were telling me, have you read this book? You have to check this one. It has to do with this painting. And so it was really magical the way it started. And also one day, if I go back here, the Gruens called me and they said, Tere, guess what? In a drawer we haven't looked at in a long time, we found a bunch of books on Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. Come and see, because they have marks and things in them. So I go there, and it was incredible because some of the same passages that I had marked in my copies were marked in Remedios' copies as well. So it was somehow for me understanding that I was on the right path and that she was thinking about them when doing some of the works. So I applied for a grant to do this research. And one of the conditions was that I had to have a publisher with at least the intention to do a book. So I approached Artes de Mexico, which is a very wonderful publishing house in Mexico, and they loved the idea. They give me the letter of intent, and I got the grant. And when I got the grant, they do books, but mostly they are known for these very deluxe periodicals or journals that are based on very specific themes related to anything about art in Mexico, from pre-Hispanic to modern. And the original idea was to do a special number about Remedios Varo only with my research. And when I got the grant and we met again, so they said, yes, this is wonderful, but we need a sponsor. We need somebody to finance this project. So I thought about who could be interested in doing this. And I thought about Bayer, the pharmaceuticals, because they hire Remedios through an agency. And she did all their commercial work, the advertisement for medications, calendars, all of that in the 40s. So who could be more interested than that to, sponsor a book on Varo, since they knew about her talent very early on. And when we met with Bayer, with Peter Kless, who was the marketing director at the time, he loved the idea, but he said, I don't want a magazine, I want a book, a complete book. Will you do that? And that's when I thought about, yes, but not only myself. And I started thinking about what will make a great Remedios Varo book that will sort of go into all this, trying to give answers to all these people that were asking what's behind these paintings. So I thought, why don't we look at what was behind in terms of ideas, mysteries, you know, her own library and her dreams. So looking at all of that and discussing it also with Walter Gruen, who was an incredible, he and Alexandra, they supported the project from the beginning and were so kind to give me access to never published material for this book. And even Walter did the chronology together with me. So we created this book. Well, this is Alberto Ruiz Sanchez. He's the co-owner of Artes in Mexico, but also a very well-known, internationally well-known writer. And he wrote the introduction. And he actually is the one that came out with the title, The Five Keys, because he thought that the way I was editing the book and inviting the people, that every essay was a key to unlock the mysteries and go inside Remedios. That's why we chose also that painting as a cover, because this portrait of her doctor, the cardiologist, who is putting a key inside her heart, that it's connected to the heavens. And so he beautifully chose the name. And well, my essay, it's titled In Search of the Miraculous. It's all about Gurdjieff and Uspensky, and either from the historical part, everything I could find out about how she got involved with the groups and all of that, through the influence in very specific works that I will discuss a little bit further after I present the chapters and the writers. And then Peter Engels, who he's an architect, but very interested in art and science. And he actually did a small exhibition in New York about Remedios Varo and science. And we had met through the Gruens. And I called Peter and asked him, what about, since your architecture is your field, but you're also interested in science and math, but also in the mystical, can you write about all the sacred geometry and everything that it's hidden and underneath the works and the meaning? And so he loved the idea and he was immediately on board. And so he wrote a great chapter called The Places of the Unconscious. Then nobody has looked at her library. So I invited a dear colleague and friend, Jaime Moreno Villarreal, who he is one of the best writers we have on art in the country. He writes beautiful essays and he combines sometimes literature and poetry and writing and art. So we went together to look at her books. And he chose some of the books that she had marked and, you know, underlined, and tried to write an essay focusing on the idea of how she was looking for the marvelous through her readings. So this was also something quite incredible. And soon you will know more at the end when I talk about a new project that will reveal much more about Varo's library soon, very, very soon. Then Janet Kaplan, of course, she had to be in the book. She was her biographer and also a great friend. Unfortunately, she's not with us anymore. And she was decided to look back at the very beginnings. And so she started to take in a completely different look at Varo's first involvement with surrealism in Barcelona when she was part of the Logicofobistas, this group that was affiliating to surrealism. And finally, well, not finally, but in terms of the keys was Fariba. And that was actually something really interesting when we met. When I went there to do research for my book, I didn't know anything about Fariba. All I know is she was the director of the foundation, and she was kind enough to have me in a residency to research in the files to see anything I could find about Remedios and Gordon. But then I discovered Fariba's expertise and all her fields and all she teaches about dreams and her knowledge on science and the unconscious and also these realms that are so fascinating. And I asked her if she knew about Remedios' dreams. And Fariba was surprised to know about this, and even more surprised to know that there were only 10 dreams that survived, actually. And so I offered that I could translate the dreams into English, and not professionally, but with my language. So at least she could, read the dreams and think about writing a chapter. And what Fariba decided to do was fantastic. And Fariba, I would love if you can share with us what you did with this fantastic chapter.
Thank you, Tere. Well, thank you for inviting me to write that chapter. It was quite fascinating when I received those 10 dreams of Remedios, and Tere wanted me to write something about it. I knew about her biography through Janet Kaplan. In fact, the first time I met Gordon, the first meeting we had a dialogue because I was very much inside of my research with lucid dreaming, and the way he could connect with what I was doing, it was Ouspensky. So he handed me Ouspensky's book, Tertium Organum. And so that was the first book he gave me. The second book he gave me, the second time I met him for tea, was Janet Kaplan's Remedios Varo. So I knew Remedios' biography, and I read those 10 dreams, and I thought, well, it's very strange. I'd never really written about anybody's dream who are not with us, because if they're with us, you can ask questions. So I did this methodology that was rather unusual. It wasn't a qualitative or quantitative research trying to figure out how to approach these dreams. As we know, Remedios and Leonora liked to do some sort of psychomagic with their writing letters to strangers, declaring love, or just making recipes. And so she was very much into these kind of psychomagic acts. So I first read the dreams, and then I looked at every painting she had done to try to find elements of those dreams inside of these paintings. And I would find certain ones. And then I looked at all these 10 dreams. 9 of them were more like day residue dreams, as something happened a day before, then she had a dream about it, or it was more of a common dreams. But one of them was a very complex archetypal dream. And I decided in the chapter, I mentioned the others, but I wanted to focus on that one dream. Yeah, I could have done the analysis, but I decided to make it a little bit more scientific. So what I did was, because I've been in this field of dream studies for many, many years, I know a lot of great colleagues. I sent this dream to 11 of my colleagues all throughout the United States and Canada. And these are people who have very well written, and researchers in laboratories, scientists. So I sent this one dream of Remedios, didn't tell them whose dream it is. And I asked them, could you please send your interpretation, your reflection about this one dream? I said, I'm doing a study. I want to see what you think. 2 of them responded and says, well, we don't work with people who are deceased. And I told them that this person is deceased. And no, actually, it wasn't, this is so long ago. They said, we cannot work with somebody's dream who we cannot interview or talk to. That's what it was, because I didn't give him any information. Anyhow, I waited till they respond, and then I wrote the chapter based on the themes that I saw coming through what these reflections were. And that was quite interesting how it came together with her biography. So I brought them together, and then I made the dream into 3 sections. It's a pretty complex dream, and I highly recommend that you actually can look at that chapter in our foundation's website. We put that one chapter there, so you can go to our lucidart.org and go to publication and look at it. It's pretty complex. And so that is how I brought it together. And I was so touched when the book came out. I ended my chapter about something I read that Walter Gruen said about Remedios' death when she died in his arms. And he said somewhere that may she have faced her anxiety and fear. And through the dream, I sort of showed that she actually did, because the dream really specifically showed. And the beginning of this dream, I will say a little bit, is that she was going to be executed because she had a secret. She had a very important secret. And that's where the Gurdjieff groups, they were very secretive. These were the sort of secret groups, and she had this secret power. But anyhow, I don't want to give it away. You should go and read it. Thank you, Tere.
No, thank you, Fariba. And we had an extra key that was added with Sandra Lishi, who was very, very dear. She was the goddaughter of the Gruens, and she was very close to them. And she tried to do something, she did actually something very poetic looking at her work. So it was a beautiful compliment for all the keys. And this is the work that first, made me think about all this relationship with Gurdjieff, because it's we think it's 1945 or 47. This is not exactly correct, but it's about the time when she met a person from Buenos Aires that was the leader of the groups in Argentina, the Gurdjieff groups, and he commissioned it to it. And there was later correspondence with Walter Gruen. That's where I had all the information. And in the picture, it's not very easy for you to see for the size, but on every door, it's covered with silver, with gold leaf, and it has a J and another J, George Gurdjieff. And at the very top, it has the design of the Enneagram, who was the most important symbol for the teachings of Gurdjieff. And every single symbol in the work is related to these ideas of ascending, of the interconnection with the universe, many elements that we're going to see again and again and again on Varo's work throughout her life. And it was really fortunate. The book was a complete independent project. There was never an idea of doing an exhibition or anything, because it was in the middle of a legal battle. So the works that were donated were at the museum. They were secured at the time, but it was impossible to think about an exhibition because nobody will lend once there was a legal battle. People were afraid, what if I lend a painting and then the niece also comes and claims that it belongs to her, its inheritance. But then as the book was being ready to go to print, the legal battle was won. And we won. Fortunately, the museums were to be at the museum, and it was the year of her centennial. So in just a few months, we planned a big exhibition that I was lucky enough to curate, and I curated based on the 5 Keys books. So the exhibition had the same title, and it had the same sections as the book. It was organized in a way as the book was. And the book came out of print a week before the opening. So we were able to present it at the same time, although it's not the exhibition catalog. And these are two photos of how the exhibition was set at MAM. And this, I just wanted to show you this because this is one of the, actually the only pictures so far when we see almost the two of them alone. There's just one gentleman. There's usually Remedios and Leonora in big groups, and this is one of the gorgeous people in Mexico they're having this photo taken with. And some of, as I mentioned, he never used the idea of painting, but he will use embroidering and knitting and, you know, spinning, because for a very specific reason, and that's what Fremantle used in the workshops, and I think it was fundamental also in how Remedios transited from a more raw style to this amazing, super refined technique, was because of these workshops. They will sit for 7 hours in a row to only look at one object, for instance, a table, and try to observe and draw and meditate and think about how that table was made from a tree, and that tree, you know, was in nature. So they had to see the organic life on everything. And then in the other workshop, they will have to work during 8 hours at a time, 7-8 hours in straight, just working with all the possible shades and tonalities of just one color, and practice, concentration and focus. And it was the same idea of the spinning and embroidering. It was to try to balance the right and left hemispheres of the brain, because we rarely use the fine motor skills, you know, to really develop. So drawing and painting is also another way to do that. And we will see very often in Varo's works the representations also of weavers and women embroidering. And one of the main concepts of Gurdjieff was that we are all a machine. He thinks that we have become so automatic in everything we do, we forget to really think or know who we are. And he talks also about men becoming like insects in terms of, you know, lower than insects in terms of intelligence. And when Remedios Varo painted this work, we see all the female figures have bicycle wheels as if they're machines. And she writes in a letter to her brother how they are coming to this shop to buy new parts, and that their consciousness level is inferior than insects. So she's talking about his ideas in a way, and representing half human, half, you know, mechanical being moving around in wheels. And we will see that in many paintings. And when the system that he developed, that was called the fourth way, was because he believed there were basically 3 different kind of human types. One that was more focused on the body or the physical energy, one focused on the emotions, and another one on the intellect. And for him, the fourth way was to be able to harmonize all these 3 parts we all have as human, and not have one predominating over the other. And this harmony of the 3 different tendencies or energies in the human, that was the only way to begin a path towards evolution. And he used the metaphor of a chariot, saying that, you know, the horse is, well, the chariot is the body, the physical body. Then the horse is the emotion. is, you know, the one that comes and goes as it goes. And then the driver should be the mind that controls everything else, but usually doesn't happen like that. And so he uses this metaphor, and I think Remedios is doing the same way. It's this chariot that it's not a horse, but it's a male driving. And actually, the woman playing the piano is the one that is activating the motion of this vehicle, fantastic vehicle. And it is interesting also because Gurdjieff always talk about how everything in the universe is made of vibrations, and music was key to achieve that. So I believe this painting is all about discussing these ideas of this fourth way. And this is the painting I told you before, the Montana log, inspired in Domal's story. And it's about the idea of ascending the mountain has to do with the evolution of man and transcendence and a higher consciousness. Then he also talked a lot about essence and personality. So basically what he will say is we are born with an essence, and this is something that it's the same idea in astrology and in many ancient and arcane knowledge. But then as we grow up and we follow a religion, a school, family, society, any kind of system, we start creating a false personality. So for him, it was like sort of like an onion, a lot of coverings hiding the true essence. So the idea of practicing, because for him it was not only, you know, expressing a theory. People that were following Gurdjieff, they had to practice either through the manual work, but also doing the derviche dancings that he called the movements, and doing meditation. So it was an integrative way of, you know, trying to work towards consciousness. And for him, it was the only way to start getting rid of all these fake personalities and make and break with them, so the true essence can come. And this is a beautiful painting that it's called Rupture, and we see this figure emerging from a place, and we see all these sort of masks that are behind the windows. And I think somehow relates to this idea that she's finally leaving all these layers and layers of a fake personality behind, and her true essence is the one emerging out of the door. And Papilla Stellar, which is the celestial pablum, is also very interesting because she had marked a very specific passage on the book. Gurdjieff's writing were very, very cryptic, and he used a lot of sometimes even crazy metaphors that are harder to understand than science fiction. And he talks a lot about all these cosmic navels and, you know, visitors from outer space. And he's not very clear in his writings, but Uspensky wrote a book which is the synthesis of Gurdjieff's teachings, and it's called In Search of the Miraculous. That's why I decided to entitle my chapter like that. That's a very, very clear explanation of the whole system and ideas of Gurdjieff. And he was really concerned about the at a very early time about global warming. He actually was writing about how the earth will be warm, so warm that will become a sun, and that part of the mission of human beings on earth now was to evolve and be able to feed the moon with our emotions, but in a more transformative way, so the moon can have life on it, so humanity could, you know, have an alternate place to go. And he was writing about this, you know, years before we set foot on the moon. And the flutist, an amazing painting. If you see this very shiny face on the personage that it's playing the flute, she was using inlaid mother of pearl in some of her paintings, and that was for one very specific reason, is that the meaning of the pearl is an illuminated being, and it's related to this idea of somebody that can be so evolved that, you know, is, in a way, it's enlightened. And of course, she was not only reading Gurdjieff and Uspensky, she was reading about many other traditions and mixing together. In this case, my focus of the study was Gurdjieff, but she was also reading about Buddhism, Zen, yoga, and anything, you name it. She was really, really interested in learning. And even Leonora Carrington told me she was the most intelligent woman she ever met in her life. Remedios was. And so here we see one of the theories also of Gurdjieff, that he used the theories of music, especially the theory of the octaves, to talk about how everything in the universe is related to the octaves, and everything is built out of vibration since the beginning of the universe. And it's beautiful how the music from the flute, as we saw in the piano, in the roulotte, that it was activating the vehicle. Here, it's the vibration of the music that is making the stones sort of, you know, fly and start building this tower that has a stairway up to heaven, which is also the idea of ascending, you know, and transformation. But also what it's interesting is the shape of the tower is based on the Enneagram. And Rodney Collins-Smith, the other follower of Gurdjieff that came to Mexico, he was building a tower. Well, it was actually not a tower. He was building a temple. It was actually upside down. It began with the Enneagram, but then instead of ascending, it was descending. And all these stones that were covering the stairway were made with the sign of fossils, as we see here. And then they were tracing sort of the evolution of humanity until the modern men, once you ended down this staircase. And that place was made for all the Gurdjieff rituals. But then and Remedios and Leonora went there, and I was lucky enough to have access. I had to promise not to reveal the location, but I took a few photographs to look and compare. And in a way, she's doing this, but the other way around. So she's going from the bottom to the top. And then Gurdjieff talks about the fourth way, but then he talks about a fifth man and then a sixth man. So he's talking about a higher evolution. The first one to achieve is the fourth way, putting together these three parts of us. But then when somebody does much more spiritual, mystical work within itself in consciousness, it can become man number 5. And man number 5 we see represented in this magician whose face has the pentacle, the 5-pointed star. And we can see that he's the one that is awakened, and he's playing with the cosmos in a way. There's all sort of magical and alchemical elements surrounding him. And we see the other figures, they are all connected to each other. And although every face is different, they look the same, they have the same dress, they look like a mass. And that's how he referred to humanity, is a mass that is completely asleep. But as Varo was so complex on everything. If you count the figures, they're also 21. So if you add up the magician, that gives us the number of the 22 major arcana of the tarot. So Varo's paintings can be read from, multiple perspectives. And finally, this is the last painting I'm going to show you. Then he thought about the man number 6. So we see the 6-pointed star within the body, and it's again the mother of pearl. And this character is inside the tree, so it's in complete harmony with nature, but also at the center of the heart has the yin and yang symbol. So meaning that it's somebody that has been able to harmonize the duality we all have within us. So it's a really evolved human being. And you can see also the sophistication of her technique. And I'm not going to discuss this here because you will be able to read a lot about it in an upcoming catalog of a Varo exhibition that I will tell you a little bit more before we end. Oh, well, here we are. So actually this Remedios Varo exhibition that it's opening at the Art Institute of Chicago on July 29 next year. It's co-curated by Caitlin Haskell. You see her next to me in the photo and myself. And we're fascinated with this project, with the whole Art Institute of Chicago, because what we're doing is something that's never been done before, which is with all the conservation team in Chicago and the whole team, and in collaboration with MAM in Mexico, is we're doing an in-depth study of her techniques and how she achieved these super complex paintings. We're working on a whole taxonomy of her different techniques with the conservators. We've examined the paintings in detail, working in the lab, and we are putting together all these to really these big important mysteries in Varo, the mystery of how she technically created the works, and the mystery on the sources and what she was trying to say within the paintings. And I will give the word to Fariba to tell a little bit about this, how all this started in this gathering that took place on September 15 at the Lucid Art Foundation.
Well, here I was talking to the former director of Berkeley Art Museum, Larry Reiner, and I was in dialogue actually with you, with Caitlin and Larry, about the possibility of doing a revisiting of the Dynaton show of the 1951 and sort of revisited for the museum. So this was basically a visioning gathering that we came together, and then out of this came you and Caitlin connecting with each other and doing this show about Varo, because they wanted to actually include Varo in the Dynaton show. And that was quite interesting, because in the Dynaton show, mainly the painters were Gordon Onslow Ford, Lee Mulliken, and Wolfgang Paulin, and Jacqueline Johnson wrote the catalog, and Lucita Hurtado helped with the installation, and to bring Varo into this conversation was fascinating, and because she was very much in line with everybody there. But unfortunately, she had passed by the time that show happened. Isn't that so?
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Or was it?
No, no, sorry, she wasn't. She stayed in Mexico. And
yes, this was 1951. So she should have been part of this show. So anyhow, this gathering happened, and then, well, then I would have to ask you, Tere, how you and Caitlin came together to do this show.
Well, actually, I mean, part of the story, we really wanted to do this Gordon show, including other artists, and the idea was to have it begin in Mexico City with a much bigger focus on his work. He lived here for 7 years, and then go to Berkeley and begin with Mexico and focus more on the Dinaton, and then go to Chicago also with the Dinaton idea, and Caitlin bring forward the idea. She was fascinated by Remedios Varo's work, and she had this great idea, why don't we bring Remedios Varo in a conversation? And we started discussing this, but then the pandemic, well, even before the pandemic, Larry resigned his as director of Berkeley, who was the one pushing that project. The change of government in Mexico cut down budgets, and the exhibition was impossible to make anymore. And so, and then the pandemics and everything got complicated. But because we started that dialogue, last year, Caitlin and I started talking about, what about doing this project together? Will it be possible? And it started, and here we are. And we will open on July 29. It's a small but very focused exhibition. It's not a big retrospective. It's really, really focused. And as I mentioned, there will be a lot of new discoveries. We will also include many of her books, and we're including the most relevant books on her library that, you know, that nobody has seen that before. So it will be a huge contribution to Remedios Varo scholarship, and I really hope you can visit the show next summer.
Well, thank you, Tere. Of course, you know, I will do my best to just come there. I told that to Caitlin, and I hope that our audience would come to see the show, because it's not easy to, I mean, people who collected Remedios Varo, they're just so protective of the work. And so whenever there is a show that she is included, or this show that Tere and Caitlin are putting together, is rare. It's really wonderful to have that opportunity to go and see it. So thank you for doing that show. I know it's not easy, and I hope that our audience would come to see it. I will definitely be there. If I'm healthy, I'll come. And I wanted to thank you, Tere, for this wonderful presentation of Remedios and talking about her influence with Gurdjieff, Uspensky, and all the connections and synchronicities. And I just love that. And I really, really appreciate that you gave us this time, and you gave us this talk. And I hope that you come back, and maybe you and Caitlin can come back and talk about your show in Chicago and do a little panel for us here.
Great. And I thank you and the foundation, because you have always support my project. I've had already 3 residencies with you, and plus all these gatherings that you organized, that thanks to you, Caitlin and I could meet, and this new project on Varo is now possible. And thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure to be here and to be able to share this project with you.
Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. I just thought that to read a couple of passages from Uspensky's book, because Tere talked a lot about Uspensky, but some of you might have read his books, or some of you may have not. And you may wonder, what was it about this book of Uspensky, Tertium Organum, that affected these artists like Gordon and Mata and Varo and Carrington? What was it in that book? And when I was working on Gordon's book, his recent book, Man in the Green Island, I write about those passages. When he gave me the book of Uspensky in 1989, I read it, but at the time I was so busy with my work with lucid dreaming. I thought, wow, this is just, of course, what he's saying is of course, because in consciousness studies, we really have done a lot of research on that. But for that book, I had to reread it again to find passages that I brought into the book. So I thought to read you a couple of passages, then you will have a really good idea about why these people in 1938, 39 read this book and went on fire. And here in one of the passages, Ouspensky says, beyond this visibility, there is a whole invisible world, a world of, to us, new and incomprehensible forces and relations. The knowledge of the existence of this invisible world is the first key to it. So that's what the reason we put it, the key to the key was very important. Both metaphorically and literally. Then he declares that understand the noumenal world, in order to understand the noumenal world, we must search for the hidden meaning in everything. Then he says that science, he means hard science. Science does not sense it and does not recognize it. He says now we have a form of knowledge, and it's very interesting. In the book, he says form of knowledge and he italicizes it. And some of you academicians, you know that we are talking about epistemology here. He was talking about that then, about form of knowledge. Now we have a form of knowledge which senses this difference perfectly, knows and understands it. He says, I'm speaking of art, the musician, the painter, the sculptor well understand that it is possible to walk differently and even impossible not to walk differently. When they read passages like that, they realized that what can art, how can through art we can create or be in touch with that, the invisible. And it's almost like they're giving the permission that art and musicians and sculptors, they can go into exploration of the fourth dimension and in dimensions.